Hello, my name is Dr. Susan Robbins, and the class that you're tuned into is Drugs in Society. Hello, class. Hello. Hello. And hello to all of the home viewers who are taking the course, and all of you late night birds who are up channel surfing. We're going to keep you awake tonight. We're going to try to, because we're going to be talking about drugs. Okay. Tonight's lecturer is Sergeant Frank Miller, who is with the Houston Police Department, and he is Sergeant of Police at the Houston Police Department Narcotics Division. And he has been a lecturer with this course for many years now. And we're thrilled to have him back, and he's going to be talking to you about police efforts to combat illegal drugs. Please welcome Frank Miller.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I have enjoyed my trips here. We usually end up with some very stimulating two-way conversations. You have a chance to nail the narc down up on the podium here and find out what you always wanted to know about dope and why do we do this or that. That's why I'm here. You've got courses on pharmacology. I don't know how deeply you'll get into recognition and identification, things like that. That is not my purpose as a police officer here. What I want to do is to give you some insight from my perspective, from my career as a police officer here, on what we do. Why is it that we do what we do? How do we go about doing what we do? Things of that nature. I'm a police instructor. I'm not a teacher. I am generally accustomed to dealing with subjects that police officers generally already have been exposed to. I update them in an in-service type format. I am a survival instructor. We are constantly teaching people how to do what they do safely on the street. And what I'm doing here tonight, I also do for the Houston Police Academy, for the cadets, and I do for the University of Houston Police Academy for their cadets, and have done for several years. So I'm the resident cop. I'm the resident narc. I would like to make this as informal as possible. I do not like formal presentations. If I say something that stimulates or brings something to mind that you'd like to know, ask. Don't wait till the break or don't wait till later. I didn't come here for you to listen to me talk. I would rather you have the information if you're curious about something. Basically, what I'm going to try to do is go over some of the history of law enforcement's attempts to get a grasp on this war on drugs. I know you've had this conversation, evidently. You will have more conversations. I know you have individual beliefs, and I know we're going to get to those. But initially, I want to give you just an overview of what I have seen during the period of time that I've been a narcotics officer. I've been with HPD for 29 years. 25 of those years, going on the 26th year now, has been spent in the narcotics division. The rest of that time I spent either in uniform patrol, or when I made sergeant, I went to the dispatch office for a year, and I handled calls for service up there in the dispatcher's office. But the remainder of that time, I have been a narc on the streets of Houston. As a young policeman, 6 months back from Vietnam, having been in the military, 6 months later, I applied to the Houston Police Department. I'm accepted. Barely met the height requirements. Had to put on a few pounds. But I had come from a military family, so this was a normal gravitation for me. A rank structure, something that's organized, was something I felt a little bit easier working within. Going back to school was not something I really relished. I didn't like being in school when I left it. Didn't want to go back necessarily. But I felt compelled to do this because I wanted to help people. That's what every policeman is going to tell you. He becomes a cop to help people. After a while, you learn the real things about what you do other than helping people. The first wake-up was, I'm only called to help you after it's done. It's over. So the first wake-up call is, what is there for me to help do? Clean up the mess, usually. And that's with very angry, very distraught, very sad, very punished, very pained people. Big wake-up. But my military background and my military bearing, I held up under the pressure. I could work within those parameters, no problem. I am in control. One of the guys that I graduated the police academy with, I very jokingly used to call my draft dodger buddy because he managed to escape when I was there. He had gone to college, University of Houston, academia, and we would poke fun at each other about me being the redneck and him being the pencil neck or whatever I called him at that time. And my closeness with him, I started to see a different point of view. I came to this campus several times and monitored some classes that he took just to see how the other side of the world worked. Mind you, both of us were policemen. At that particular point in time, you didn't tell a lot of people you were a policeman. I definitely didn't tell people I was just back from Vietnam. That was even a worse no-no. So I monitored academia and made another decision, and it still wasn't for me. Policing was where I needed to be, so that's where I stayed. About a year and a half, almost 2 years into my career, I had an opportunity to interview for the Narcotics Division. This was 1968. If you can picture in your mind what was going on the streets of Houston or on the streets of any large city in 1968. We still had troops overseas. I was an undercover ex-military, ex-Marine. Didn't want to tell anybody about that. Couldn't wait to get a job so I could tell them what I really was. So I could hide the rest. Somebody told me somewhere along the line there was a lot of things I didn't have to be proud of. I would argue that in another format, but not here. Okay? So I interviewed for this job being a narc. No idea, no clue. And I had to tell the sergeant that interviewed me, I know absolutely nothing about drugs. I knew it existed. I knew some of the names. I was not one of those guys in high school that did drugs. And I went to a local high school, graduated from Robert E. Lee on the southwest part of town, and that's a whole other subject altogether. But he says, that's fine. That's where we want you. That's where we need you. You need to learn. You need to open your mind up because you're about to enter a whole different world than what you're used to. And believe me, I did. The first thing I had to do, now remember I came from a military background, the first thing I had to do was grow some hair. Now, I could do that then. I really could. I had some pretty hair. I had some long hair. By the time it was over, I could grab my hair back here. I got used to it. But that sort of went against the grain of how I was raised with the high and tight military bowl cut that I was born with. So I was still living at home with my parents, and the first thing I had to do was get them used to the fact that the neighborhood hero was going to turn hippie. That was not a fun thing to do. They welcomed me literally with a neighborhood band, if you can picture this. All the kids, they had a sheet across the street. Everybody signed it. I was the neighborhood hero. Welcome home the guy from the war kind of thing. And the very next thing, and then I go in the police department, I was even better. Everybody wanted their kids to be pleased. Not only, I babysat with all those kids, watched them grow up. Now I have to go home, and one of the instructions that I had was you can't tell anybody what you do. It's dangerous. People find out what you do, you could die overnight. People will come find you, get you out of your bed. They don't like narcs. Okay, so you can't tell anybody what you do, even your family. Well, I had to tell my family. I just couldn't do that. And when I came home with the news, guess what, Dad? Now, he retired after 30 years in the Marine Corps. Dad, I'm going to grow long hair, going to wear scruffy clothes, going to hit the street and buy dope for the city. And it took him a little while to grasp what all that meant. My cover story at the time was, I'm going back to school, because I was going to be looking like everybody that went to school anyway. So the cover was, I'm going to U of H, going back to school, work on the degree, join the SDS, Students for Democratic Society at the time, become a radical and, do whatever everybody was doing in those days. But I'm going to look a little funny. Well, the rules of the house at that time were, if that's what you have to do, that's okay, but you can only come home at night and let yourself in. That was almost literally true. I rode a motorcycle. I had long hair. I bought dope, came home at all hours of the night, and I had a great time. I had a ball. The 60s, whatever all you heard about the 60s, let me tell you, most of it was a lie. I made some of these big radical meetings I had on this campus, and everybody rah-rah and boy, anti-war, this and that. The whole deal boiled down to one thing. Let's get the meeting over so we could go smoke a joint and find some women. That was the deal. It was party time. Maybe only 10% of those people were really actively, politically active. The rest of them, it was just something to do. It was a fun time. And everybody paraded, and everybody wore patches that made everybody else angry, and we, you know, it was just the young people's time, and it was great. And I moved among those people. I bought drugs from those people. Some of them may have been related to you as mothers or grandparents by now. I don't know how old you are. That's a frightening thing for me to think about. But the do-your-own-thing society was alive and well. And at this particular point in time, law enforcement's approach to this problem, this dope problem that we were starting to have, was to join. If you're going to find out what's going on out there, you need to look like one, you need to be like one, you need to get out there and mix and mingle with them and find out what's going on. Well, this was not part of my nature. I was very uncomfortable with it. I did it because I wanted to have fun. It beat riding around in the patrol car, so, you know, there it was. That was the truth of it. I hated writing tickets, and I liked riding a motorcycle, so that was pretty cool. I met a lot of other narcs who were doing the same thing. Every federal agency, every local agency in this town had guys that looked like me. And it almost got to the point where we were the only guys that looked like us. You know, even the hippies didn't look like us. I mean, we had our own concept of what hippies were supposed to look like, you know. So some of it was a game. A lot of it wasn't. There were some very frightening times. But for the most part, law enforcement at that time was faced with a big challenge. The people, the voters, the neighborhoods were scared to death. What are our young people doing? What are they doing to us? What are they bringing home? What are they smoking, and what do they call it? Parents were frightened. Schools were frightened. It was a very disturbing time. From my perspective, it was very disturbing because there did not seem to be any direction for anybody anywhere. While half of them were having a good time and having fun, the other half of them were trying to figure out how to quell this riot. And are we okay? Where are we at with this? And what is this stuff called drugs? It had been there all through the 40s and 50s. They called it different things. Most of that stuff, if you were caught with it, for instance, a matchbox of marijuana got you life in prison. During those particular times, any type of drug was prohibited, with the exception of alcohol. That's a whole other subject. But at the time I became a narcotics officer, that was the law of the land. Any drug got you put in jail and got you big time, with the exception of some prescription drugs. And that was another whole big thing. The drug doctors at that particular time, what we call script doctors, diversion investigations where they put legal pharmaceuticals on the street illegally, that was something that was wide open too. So my education began. A very interesting part of that period in my time was to see how the other half lived. Because I looked like you, and I use you figuratively. I looked like you. I dressed like you. I tried to learn to talk and walk like you. And as a result of that, I was treated like you by the police. One of the major achievements, one of the major drives that law enforcement had at that time was to see how many people we could document selling drugs. In our perspective, if you sold me anything, you were a dealer. We had to define it that way. If you sold me anything, you were a dealer. By statute, by law, that's how you were defined, and that's how we treated you. If I bought from you once, twice, 3 times, you were a major dealer. Because I showed a crime pattern. I showed a pattern. Every time I went back to you, you freely sold me drugs. It didn't matter what it was the pattern that we had to see. And during those particular times, we had very little trouble with going to grand juries or going to judges, getting warrants for arrest, because the people wanted to see it. It was something that was needed. I felt I was needed. We all felt in the business at the time we were needed. We were doing something that was very worthwhile. Despite the fact that millions of people out there did not agree with us, that didn't matter. But my opinion counted because it's the law, and by God, we follow the law in this country. And I was still waving that flag and proud of it. And still growing hair, having a great time, riding that Harley. And it was fun. Yes?
What were you all told was the justification for you all having to go out and arrest people for using these drugs, for example, marijuana, other than the fact that it was the law? What were you all how were you all educated about the effects of drug abuse and why it was so necessary for you to, be arresting people?
Good question. Very little training was given to us as far as what do drugs do. Psychological effects, physiological effects, none of that was as important as it is the law. It is not just those people who do the drugs, they must possess those drugs to do them. And that's what the definition was. That's how we had to define it. My opinion didn't count as to whether I thought it was okay for you to smoke a joint. The fact was, I took an oath. My job said, you will find, you will seek, you will arrest these people who are responsible for putting these drugs on the street. Okay? The focus of what we did was to find those people who were dealers, not the users. I would never make it home, and it's still that way today. And you have to agree. I would never make it to work or make it home from work if I stopped everybody I saw smoking a joint in a car. It couldn't be done. The user, and I'll get to this because we do focus on users today. There are programs, and I'll get to that later in the lecture. But our main focus at the time was to identify suppliers, and that was strictly a matter of interpretation by that agency. The feds had their own interpretation. What a drug smuggler was to him was a street-level dealer to me. My job was to find the street-level dealer, infiltrate his organization, buy from him, make a case on him, turn him over to tell me about the rest of his cohorts, and on and on and on. But to be real truthful with you, it was very little education. If all I had to have was the nerve, you want to go out there, son, you got it. Carry a gun. If you got to hurt anybody, call me in the morning. That type of attitude. That was literal. That was literal. The state of violence in the drug community is nowhere near what it is today. And again, that's going to come later on. So me fearing for my life was not the big issue. The issue was I have to seek and destroy. We have to find these drug dealers and get rid of them. Well, once my education began, I saw that almost anybody on the street during that time was capable of selling to me 3 or 4 times. And it got to be a friendship kind of thing. You knew somebody who knew somebody, but like, well, if he's a friend of yours, yeah, I'll sell a baggie of weed. Now, this is back when a baggie of weed was $10. It's about $100 today for a 1-ounce baggie of weed. Then 10, when it went up to $20, that was outrageous. These agencies couldn't afford that kind of money. I'll get into budgets too, but the primary function was to identify who we considered were the local drug dealers, make as many cases as we could, go back, indict, put them in jail. And at that particular time, in the 60s and the 70s, we got big jail time. The attitude of the general public through the jury system, okay, and I could only see this 12 people at a time. The jury system, the people were telling us, we don't want this on the street. They handed down very severe penalties. When you could get 35 years for a matchbox of weed, and I did that. That was my highest, the biggest penalty that I got during that particular time was, believe it or not, a teacher who was selling pounds of weed that I bought from and got him 35 years. That was huge. That was unheard of. But that's what the pulse of the people said at that time. They were scared to death on where this revolt was going. They didn't know whether it was drug-related or whether it was politically motivated. From the street side, from what I saw on the street, it was just another format for dope. It had very little to do with actually wanting to be politically active. All that was a stage. It was a platform. So DPS, your state police, DEA, who was FBN then, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. The FBI was not in the drug business at that time. That's something that's relatively new. All of us had the same agenda. Hit the street, work undercover, buy dope. For a year and a half, they pulled my employment records. I did not work for HPD. Nobody could confirm where I worked. I lived on the street. I bought dope on the street. I met my contact in back alleys and gave him the dope I bought and told him my story, and he wrote my reports. He gave me my paycheck. And that's how I lived for a year and a half. I never went to my office. The men that worked in the narcotics division at the time did not know me. There were 2 of us at the time with HPD like that. and it may seem like a TV series, but I was having a ball. I really was. I bought dope at night, played golf in during the day, and it was great. But this was day after day, night after night. We kept buying joints. We kept buying baggies. We bought acid. We bought pills. Whatever was out there, all we had to do was buy one or two of it and ask this guy, can I come back and see you again? And if he said yes, I had a conspiracy. So then I went back to him to see him again. Hey, man, you remember me? Oh, yeah, nobody remembered anybody. Yeah, I remember you. The guy was ripped when I bought from him the first time. Yeah, I remember you. He has a great bag of weed, man. It's a good lid. You think I could score another one? This is my friend Tony. And Tony, hey, man, how you doing? All right, Tony buys one, and I buy one. Well, Tony was my partner. Now we have two undercover guys buying from this one guy, one baggie of weed at a time. He's a major player. Oh, he's got to go. This guy, he's up there, okay? This was popular with the people. Understand what the people wanted. We followed the mandates behind what my supervisors and my bosses told me what the people wanted. About once every 3 months, we had what you call a roundup. Now, this is not just here. This was nationwide this is going on. This was pretty much the law enforcement's approach to deal with this heinous crime out here with all these drugs. About every 3 months, we would meet at a central location. All of the agencies. They would bring the grand jury out there. The grand jury would actually meet in session at DPS headquarters here in Houston. That's usually where we went. And all of the buys that we had been making for months, and we did those reports, we gave to the grand jury, and they decided then and there if they would indict. Most of the time, they indicted. And they stamped it and they sealed it that night. And for the next 3 days, we hit the streets trying to find these people that we were buying from. And we'd have a big roundup, and it'd be a big news blitz. Look what we're doing. We are doing something about this war on drugs. They didn't call it a war at that time. We are doing something about this drug problem. These young hippies running around with long hair selling drugs, and we're doing well. The people loved it. The juries loved it. We got a lot of time for it. We put a lot of people in the penitentiary for that. It was accepted. Along with this came an increase in police budgets. The more successful we were, we could go back to the citizenship and say, hey, look how good we did. It takes money to do this. In overtime, money to buy drugs, money to pay informants. All of these activities had to take place for us to do what we did. And if this program was successful, you got paid for it. So my chief could ask for a larger budget the next year if it was narcotics related. That hasn't changed a lot since then. If it is drug related, for instance, we have grants that we apply for now. That's a little bit later. But the focus is trying to find money enough to keep people like me on the street to do what we do. And the more successful we were at these indictments, the better off that budget situation got. It was a high visibility time for police. It was up to the narcs to decide where the high crime areas were, where the highly populated areas were as far as drug distribution. The Montrose area was it. It was happening all over this place. It was a different Montrose. Okay, it was. Anything and everything. In some aspects it hasn't changed, but it was the easiest training ground for new narcs. So every other night you're out there, and in some of the rallies that we used to go to, you saw more narcs out there than you did the people. There were more feds, there were more spies, there were more people trying to find out what was going on, when all the people were out there partying. We were in there trying to find out what was happening. But the training ground was make your first couple of buys and get used to doing it. Learn the talk. Well, it doesn't take much. Do you have any weed? Yeah. Would you sell me some? Yes. That's got to be a pretty nervous act, considering the fact that we had no surveillance units then. I had no backup. I did not carry a weapon. None of these under my shirt. We have none of the support that we've got today in the event that something happened to me. Many a night I ended up with 4 and 5 people in the back of my car, my personal car, riding from one place to another to buy drugs while someone in the back seat was shooting heroin, the other guy was snorting a little coke, this guy was starting to wig out a little bit on the acid that he'd done an hour before. A lot of this was happening in my car I had to use my car, my personal car. The budget did not allow for these fancy Mercedes. But don't believe what you see on TV. We do not drive those things. I've never seen a Maserati. Okay? The interesting thing I think about it, and maybe the more interesting to you, something for you to remember, the target of focus was not the big problem. And as a narc, the big problem is your sources of distribution. That's where you want to go, Mr. Big. That's where I want to be. I want to live there. I want to get to that guy. But it got to be a race for budgets. It got to be a race for money. And in doing so, the easiest guy that came along got to be the target. So most of the time, drug operations on the street targeted street-level type use. Street-level type dealers, small quantities at a time. It got easier. I didn't have the money to buy large quantities to impress Mr. Big, so that's where we stayed, at that low street level. That's where our successes were, at that low street level. Meanwhile, this country, specifically this area of the country, the southwest part of the country, was slowly becoming a transshipment area. And it truly is that today. And it was increasing at numbers that we were not aware of. We did not realize how big the problem actually was, because we were still buying it nickel and dime. Yes?
Frank, at that time, were most of the drugs that you were confiscating and finding on people mostly marijuana and hallucinogens?
Yes. Yes. Weed was the easiest to get. It was the gateway drug. It was the opening. It was the introduction. Other than alcohol, weed was the most prevalent and prominent. And then as you went along, if you dared try something different, and most people did at that particular time, if you were in that experimental stage, quote unquote, went to that. But for the most part, we dealt with marijuana.
Were you finding a lot of heroin and cocaine on the streets then?
Cocaine, no. Heroin, yes. Heroin was very prevalent. Once my focus was switched from hippie dope, from the weed, I also went undercover to buy heroin. And that's a totally different situation when you're buying from people like that. Totally different. But most of law enforcement in that area did refocus at a time when heroin became the primary. We started to see some differences of focus in marijuana, legalization, attempts to legalize, decriminalize, things like that. So the switch was heroin. Cocaine was a rich man's dope, rich man's drug. It was quite expensive. It was not prevalent. It was out there, and it was an oddity for us to make a large seizure. And keep in mind, a large seizure would have been a few ounces during that time. That would have been a pretty substantial amount of dope for us to get. Knowing what you know today, what you read in the papers about the drug business, you can realize how much was actually physically out there. But because of the restraints that we did have, because of the budget restraints we had, we couldn't get to it. Another thing for you to remember, too, is because the people liked what we did, there was a great relaxation of civil rights, as it were. In the areas of search and seizure, search warrants, individual liberties, my right to come into your home, my right to wiretap your phone, things like this. These were all tools that are still used today to fight drug users, drug dealers. But it was very open, very widely done in that particular era. And a lot of those times it was done without the legality in place. Okay? I felt, we felt, they felt justified in what they did because the people liked our presence. It was accepted. Now we're going to see as time goes by that changes. Civil liberties become a little bit more important then. Toward the end of the Vietnam era, we started to see a lot of different changes on the street. And the police focus, narcotics focus started to change as well. But it's going to be a little slower, generally, than what our drug dealers are doing because we do not have the money or resources to do what he does. And we start to see, again, a lessening of the acceptance of the people in the methods that were used. Again, I'm not condoning those methods. I did live with them. That was the tool that I had at that time. That was all I was given at that time. Now I have far more. I have many more restraints than I had then, and I'm thankful for them. I really am. Believe me, I'm a lot more comfortable today than I was then. We started to see the development of task forces around the states. Federal, state, local started to enjoin. I'm sorry, question.
I was just curious as to what restraints you have now as compared to then.
Probably 3 times the number of drug laws concerning search and seizure. What I have to use to present probable cause to a judge to get that warrant. You may have a judge at that particular time that liked the police, and it wouldn't take much for me to run a piece of paper by him and say, I have a warrant for this house, Judge. Frank, how you doing tonight? Pretty good, sir. You doing okay? Fine. And we're off and running. Today I'm reviewed by a district attorney. It has to be certified by a district attorney. All that probable cause is reviewed by that judge, and quite often it's kicked back to say, this sentence isn't right, the clause isn't right, I'm not questioning your probable cause, but I will not have this reversed in Supreme Court because I did wrong. And that type of check and balance was not in place then.
Well, are the standards different on a federal than from a city level? Because, I mean, you hear horrible stories where people are busting down people's doors and they're not using warrants anymore.
I would have to, on an individual basis, look at what you're talking about, because I can tell you from my experience that does not happen often. I am a supervisor in the 4th largest city in the nation, and it is inconceivable for me to think that I am going to condone my group of 10 people saying, look, let's just go pick on this guy. Let's just go kick this door and see if there's something there. We have so much legitimate work to do, I don't have time to harass the citizenship. There are times it has happened when police have got the wrong house. It has happened. And it's happened right here in this town. This informant tells that informant who says, hey, Joe Blow, Frank, it's that house. I just left there. I bought drugs there. Here it is. And you get your warrant based on your information, and it turns out to be the wrong place. Yes, it has happened. But to arbitrarily just drive down the neighborhood and say, this looks like a good place to go, I'll fire you in a heartbeat. And federal, state, local, it definitely is the same standard. But before, the end justified the means. Law enforcement went through a great transformation to get past that period.
It's different, though, in terms of warrantless searches concerning cars.
Yes. Yes, it is. I've got, and this gets a little bit maybe far afield from history, but the use of drug dogs, for instance, was not something that has happened until the last 10 to 15 years. Okay? That drug dog can testify literally in court, which means when his handler sits on the stand and says, when Fido does this on the ground next to this suitcase, there's drugs there. He's demonstrated it numbers of times. So whenever I certify that drug dog on that stand, the next time Fido makes a hit, it's not questioned. And today, as far as a change in the law is concerned, a motor vehicle is a movable crime scene. It can escape me. It can get away from me. So it is now probable cause for a warrantless search if, 1, I have reason to stop you. I have probable cause to stop you to begin with, not just because, let me see who you are. And 2, I get a positive alert from that drug dog. If that exists, that officer can search that vehicle. Okay?
Do you usually take a dog out to the scene where there's some suspect of drugs in that car?
Yes, yes, if one's available. It's a lot easier for that dog to find those drugs than 8 guys looking in a place that's piled high with clothes, this and that. We usually let that dog go through that area first, and then we go back and find whatever he alerted to. Yes.
Or if somebody says, no, you can't search my car, you don't have probable cause, and you really believe that there are drugs there, will you not then bring dogs out to sniff around the car?
We would bring the dogs out, but more than likely under those circumstances, I'm going to call the DA and I'm going to get a warrant. When all else fails, folks, we get a warrant. And it's not as easy, and it takes hours to do, but there's a time constraint, and this is different too. To get back to your first question, I could hold you as long as I needed to for my investigation before. Today, the rule for the Supreme Court was it reasonable time? Okay? And if I kept you out on that street corner for 40 minutes waiting for a dog, that's not reasonable. And I lose that case. I have acted in good faith. I believe you have drugs. There's a number of things that point to drugs in your car, but because of the reasonableness issue of what I made you go through, that's the civil liberty that will be protected, and I will lose that case. Before, it wouldn't have mattered. Today, it really does. Yes?
I'm not here from Texas. I'm from another state. But as a teacher, I was a high school teacher. Due to parents' concern about whether or not there were drugs in the school, there were instances where drug dogs were brought into the school and allowed to check the lockers to sniff for drugs. Is that practiced here? And how does that fit under the rules of having basis or not?
It's happened. It has happened. They tried this program, and to my knowledge, it's not done very. There's a problem with this, okay? It was done, and the dog being brought into the school was not necessarily to find drugs. It was to inhibit these kids from bringing it. It was a scare tactic. I could bring a drug handler in here and tell you that if I have a row of lockers, and there are drugs in 3 of these lockers, and there's an airflow, what they call a scent cone going through that area, that dog doesn't know which locker it's in. He just knows it's somewhere. And that's a big probable cause issue when we start popping locks and saying, well, this is little Johnny's locker. The dog found it. There were some real strong issues involving probable cause with that. So in my opinion, dogs are not a good choice. There may be better ones, but I do know that there are programs that exist that they still do that occasionally. Yes?
Yeah, they did it at my high school, and they even went out to the parking lot and sniffed your car, and then they came and got you out of class if there was probable cause, and you had to unlock your car.
Right. Again, this is one of those civil liberty issues that have been revisited now. It still happens. I won't tell you that it doesn't. A lot of times it stopped when the drug dogs passed through the teacher's parking lot. Enough said. Fair is fair. Okay? If you're going to go through my truck, go through the teacher's parking lot. From a point of view, if I may, when all else fails, you are a child. If you are a child age 16 below, I have a duty to protect you. And if that's what I define as protection, then that's what I'm going to do. Now, that's the mentality, okay? When you are in that school, that teacher has you as a responsibility. All too often, I think our parents leave that responsibility to them. We don't take enough of our own, but still, I have a right to protect you. Being a minor, being a child, you do not always make wise decisions on what's good for you, so I'm going to do that for you. And like it or not, that's part of the law. And if that measure means I'm going to go through these cars and I'm going to sniff, okay? And if you do that a couple of times, what would happen? You stop bringing your stash to school. You left your stash someplace else, but you didn't have it in your car, okay? So I'm not saying it worked. I'm just saying that's what our justification was. You get with the school says we got a problem, and for some reason, folks, and this will be all through what I have to say, when all else fails, they look to the cops. Now, why this has been, I don't know. But when everybody has problems with dealing with drugs, they come to the police for an answer. And I personally, being a 29-year cop, don't think it's with me. I do not think the answer lies with me, but you keep coming. So if you ask me if you want help from me, guess what I'm going to do? Lock you up. What else is there that I have? The tools I have to use for my profession are designed to catch you from doing wrong or once you've done wrong, not to go out and help. Originally, when I became the cop to help, I'll help you. I'll help you in these cuffs and help you to jail. That's the only help I can offer sometimes. Yes, sir.
With the changes in attitudes and the changes in the ways you do your business over the past 29 years, do you find it easier or harder to make arrests, and do you find it easier or harder to make those arrests stick in court?
Believe it or not, I find it easier to make arrests. I like the restraints. I don't have to worry about going into court and being caught in the middle of perjury. Okay? One area where that would come into play was when I would use an informant to make an introduction to a crook. And this informant made the introduction, and I made the buy from the bad guy, and I filed on the bad guy and insisted there was no one else there. Today, that's against the law. That's perjury. Then it was a matter of protecting my sources, like a newspaper person would protect that source and go to jail no matter what. That's what I was prepared to do. Today, there are rules and methods and SOPs in place where I don't have to worry about that. Believe me, I would just soon follow the rules than try to make it up on my own. I lived in an era where we almost made it up on our own nightly. And I'm not here trying to justify it. I put people in jail for the right reasons. It is today when we think about how terrible those things may be. I went through a period of time when 7 people in the Houston Police Narcotics Division went to the penitentiary behind that type of thing. I was still living on the street, didn't know it was happening. I was the rookie. Very scary period of time in my life, but this kind of a thing was happening all over the country. Attitudes were starting to change, and those methods were no longer acceptable for anybody. So yes, if I do my job right, I dot the I's and cross the T's, I make my case. If that case walks, it's because of something I didn't do, and that's how I supervise. That's how I instruct police cadets. You lose a case because it's something you didn't do. We complain a lot about being handcuffed by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court lets me stop your car on the street, sniff it with a dog, and put you in jail without a warrant. Does that sound like a handcuff? That sounds like a pretty large liberty. And it's not that simple. It's called probable cause, and I'll be glad to answer any question you have about that, but I've got to have a damn good reason. And my conscience is clear. I sleep at night. I wake up. I raise my kids. I'm married. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a daddy. My kids are in school. I'm scared to death. And I have an older son who had a drug problem. I've been through it all, just like y'all. Scares me to death. But the rules make me comfortable. The rules allow me to work and train and learn in a better environment than making it up as we go along. But that's all we had. I'm not asking for your sympathy. Grandpa still went to jail. You know, I'm sorry, but that's the way it was. That's the way it was on the street. Tax increases. That's the only way we could fund these things. It wasn't popular, but we found it easier for the citizenship to say, hey, if that's what it takes to fight crime, raise it. It was incredible during that period of time. I saw 3 pay raises of one 15%, one 10%, one 12%. That's unheard of. I haven't had a pay raise in 10 years. I just recently got one. It's 3%. Below the cost of living, but that's been my only pay raise in 3 years. I'm not going to argue with you about what you do. You know where it's at, but what happens when city council says, hey folks, if you want to fight crime and evil, we got to up those taxes? Is that what you want to have happen? No. No. In those days, you paid for what you got. No excuse, but that's the people. That was the mentality. That was the state of the union at that time as far as fighting drugs. And most crimes, most policing at that time was accepted by the public. They didn't want crime. They didn't want to be preyed upon. But that was a time when you could walk downtown Houston and go to a movie. You could shop at Foley's. You could go to a restaurant in the center part of town. That's where everybody partied, and they went. There were clubs down there. Allen's Landing was alive with clubs, and people had fun. Do you see that now? They're afraid. The streets are wide open with all kinds of different things. One of my theories is drugs had a lot to do with that. We won't get into economics. I am not an economics professor, but I have seen over 29 years what drugs do to the streets, to the family, to business, to government. I've seen it. And I know what it does. I don't have a solution. Quit coming to me. Quit coming to me. Folks, I have seen billions of dollars spent in the war on drugs, and look at where we're at. That's all I can tell you. Yes?
Do you think it's the actual drugs, or is it the criminalization of the drugs?
Criminalization of the drugs?
That's destroying the neighborhoods and the families and things like that, because it's driving the price and making people go underground and then
First of all, prices are better than they've ever been for drugs. It's at an all-time low. Whoever told you prices are going up, no such drug war. It's pretty stable. criminalizing drugs, I try not to take issue with some of these things because I have seen what it does. I hate the thought of decriminalizing the drugs we have. If you could select one to make it legal, which one would it be? Well, right, there are very
Marijuana?
well, there are very strong opinions. Why select that one? Why that one in particular?
Basically because it does the same thing that alcohol does. And less dangerous from what we've learned.
Less dangerous. There's a couple of ways of looking at dangerous. I worked a case with a young man, I say young man, he's 25, 26 years old, young to me. About 6 months ago, we were buying a lot of marijuana from this boy. This boy was responsible for 200 pounds at a time, just marijuana. Okay? He himself was a pretty nice guy. I didn't have anything wrong with him. Personally, I thought he was a nice kid, a little misguided. This guy had some heavy connections I'd like to know, but him personally, I didn't see him as a bad person. You know, the guy just had some screwy things about him. What he was doing, I thought, was illegal, selling marijuana, so we went after him. Not as bad, after our investigation was over, we did not make the case on him. We did make the buys. We didn't get the big load. He was shot and killed by the people he deals with. Now, there's two different ways to think about it. Is the drug going to kill you, or is your environment going to kill you? They are hand in hand in this business today. It was not like that back in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, early 80s. It wasn't necessarily like that.
But Frank, is that a consequence of the laws and the stringency?
No, I don't.
But didn't we see the same thing with alcohol prohibition?
Certainly. What happened with alcohol prohibition? And I always say this, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves at this point, but when the question comes to legalized drugs, look at how successful we were with alcohol. We did real good making that one legal, and that's the #1 killing drug in America today, bar weed, coke, anything else. Is it just the alcohol that kills? No, there's a lot of consequences behind its use. It's abuse, not use. There are people that smoke weed every day that don't have two-headed babies, and they live, okay, and they thrive, and they make sense, and they are educated, normal people. I agree. But if you're going to open that gateway to say, let's throw another choice out there, look at your next generation. That's all I could offer. You had something else behind it. Go ahead.
Well, I can't help but think if it was legalized, the people who were, the guys higher up giving this kid the drugs, they would be basically out of business because probably somebody else from within our country would be delivering.
Who else? Who would do that? The government?
Oh, I'm sure there's a lot of people that would be willing to do it.
The Philip Morris Tobacco Company, because they can't sell cigarettes anymore.
That's right. Once the tobacco's gone, then the weed comes back. It's possible. Yes, it's possible to do that. Do you think it's going to lessen its use? If you legalize something, what are you really doing with it? Encouraging people to do it in a safe environment, right? Where you can do it in the privacy of your own home or in public, then let's make it open for the general public to do it anytime they feel like. Do you think it's going to lessen the problems and the consequences surrounding its use? Do you really think that would help? You tell me.
I don't think it would make a difference.
Okay. Yes.
Well, my question goes back to you mentioned that drug prices are lower and that we've spent $millions on the war on drugs.
Yes.
But we were told here that the fact that drug prices are lower means that there are probably more drugs on the street.
Sure, there
supply
are.
and demand.
There
So
are.
is the war on drugs and spending millions of dollars really working if there are more drugs on the street now?
I'm here to tell you, from my point of view, no. As a policeman, I'm telling you that, no. I've seen the millions spent and it hasn't done it. But again, you're arguing with the wrong guy. I'm the guy with the strong opinion that says don't do it. When I go into schools and talk to kids, I have to say don't do it. One of the things that I harp about when I talk to schools and I talk to kids is I think today's youth do not know what consequences are, but they know choices. You understand the difference there? Sometimes it's not so subtle, especially when you have one, and I've been a narc all my life, you have one in your own family that's done it, that got caught, and he goes to jail, and he has a problem, and then you start worrying about what was it. Okay? I have very strong opinions about that, but again, remember where my perspective comes from. Not academia, It's not scientific, it's police. I'm a cop, I work the street, and I say no. If you like it, we vote on it. You know, I'll vote with you. My vote's no, but if you say yes, I got another job tomorrow. I do something else.
I also want to be clear that one of the things that even the most stringent legalizers who have come to talk to this group about have been very, very against children using drugs. So even the folks who have said, yes, everything should be legalized and medically supervised, not simply sold on street corners, but medically supervised, even those folks, I've not heard of one of them say it's okay for kids to do drugs.
Sure, sure. If you understand the concept of arrested development, and that's not a rock band, that is a real consequence to a developing system being, being overcome by some type of a chemical, it's devastating. But I am not about to stand here and tell you that if you decide today to go light up a joint out here after this class, you're going to ruin yourself for life. I know better than that. Remember why I'm here. You're asking me, what do the cops do? You've had a lot of other people with a lot of other opinions. You're asking me, what do the cops do? What do the cops do? We put people in jail. Is that the answer? No. I've been putting them in jail for a long time. It hasn't helped yet. But I'm not going to quit. I'll be damned if I'll quit. I'm going to stick to my opinion because I believe it. I've seen people die, and I've seen people ruined, and high taxes and the whole deal. Insurance, I have to pay it. The raise I got is not paying for the increase I just got in my insurance premium that came with my 3% pay raise. Thank you very much. Off the bandwagon, okay? I feel very strongly about it, and we've had some interesting discussions in these classes, and I always come away from here with another point of view, but I can become very dogmatic when it comes to my personal belief, okay, and I don't think it's a good idea. What is a power lunch today? Is it not fashionable, a power lunch, you're making decisions, you go out and have a couple of drinks, a couple of scotches, maybe some bourbon, and you go back to work, okay? We go back to work. That's okay. It's socially acceptable. Let's go out and smoke some weed legally. Let's go out and snort some cocaine. Let's do some heroin, whatever it may be. And yes, I sound a little facetious, but the analogy is I'm going back to work with it. Now, the guy that's going back to work is the one that's going to replace your mother's heart valve or the radiokeratotomy on your eyes or some other such thing that requires some skill and focus. Now, I'm here to tell you there's doctors that smoke weed every day and go in that operating room. You know it. And they drink heavily, and they're alcoholics, and they still function as professionals. How they do it, don't ask me, but they do. I have to look at it from that standpoint. How much more are we going to make okay in this country before those same kids that these people are worried about get the message? When do we start them on their choices? That's what bothers me. And it scares me about raising my own kids. When do they get to make those choices? Too early. Too early now. Yes?
But at the same time, do you think the penalties are a little stiff or harsh, considering some of the, sure there are choices and consequences, but based on some of the rearing practices or upbringing that some of these kids have, the penalties can be very severe. I know especially within the federal system, there's no leniency. There's a set amount of time given for a set amount of possession.
Sure.
And is that
okay? You were born, I don't know where, I don't know when, upper middle class America, and I catch you doing something and you're going to jail. I'm going to consider your background. You were born in a lower socioeconomic area, very depressed, low income area. You commit the same crime, you're going to jail. Which one of those two guys needs to not go to jail longer?
No, that's not it, but the zero tolerance of how we handle drug problems across the board.
What you asked me was sentences. They're going to jail longer. Certain people are going to jail longer because maybe they were not as privileged as others. Maybe they did not have the education. Maybe they were less cared for in parenting skills.
Across the board, I'm suggesting that maybe the sentences should be more lenient for everyone, not necessarily for this segment or that segment.
Sure.
Because you can be reared incorrectly regardless of the background or the economic capabilities of your family.
I agree. There's some people in here that were born and raised with a switch across their butt today. That is abuse. But I got raised right, okay? There is a move to do that. The state of Texas and other states have just added a fourth felony, a fourth-degree felony. Now, police fought this. I'm for more penalties. I'm for the people. The people want to see you go to the penitentiary. Again, remember why I'm here. Not to cut you loose, but to put you in there. But I'm also going to tell you I don't think it helps. If that confuses you, I'll try to square that away. But I can't, on the one hand, put you in jail, on the other hand, advocate you being released. That's hard for me to do. I can't live that way. But we have created a fourth-degree felony in the state of Texas. That's called state jail. It's not penitentiary, and it's not jail. It's state jail. Automatic probation. I don't care what it is. Sell me a rock, one rock. By the way, automatic probation, whereas before that one rock would get you a third-degree felony, and I could get you some big time. We have now what they call deferred adjudication. This isn't new, but this is another adjustment to penalties to where, all right, I'm going to give you a chance. Maybe this was your first time. You broke the law. Remember, a jury sentenced you, not the cops. The jury sentenced you, but I'm going to give you 7 years probation, deferred adjudication, which means at the end of that 7 years, if you didn't do anything else wrong, it's over. It never happened. Your record is expunged. It is not a conviction. That's new. But on the other hand, we're seeing some enhancements too. If you do it in a school zone, what's happening now in a school zone? 1,000 feet of a school zone with a weapon or drugs. It's automatic time to do no probation. So they gave in some, but they took away some. But that's the people. That's the legislature. That's not the police.
Frank, how many
Yes,
poor
sir.
folks with public defenders get deferred adjudication?
Oh, not many, probably. It's a money game. That's a whole other issue. Get a lawyer and nail him down. And if you care to note, the majority of your legislators are lawyers. The majority of your judges are lawyers, and we do battle with them daily. Yes, this system has a lot of flaws, and it is uneven. And the guy with the money walks. Don't beat up the cop. That's all I can ask you. I'm like the umpire, okay? Don't show me making a bad call. But I feel the same way because you know what? My kid went to jail. And I have to say this, and I know this is being publicized, but I'll say this anyway. I get a phone call in the middle of the night. Sarge, yeah, this is Officer Joe Blow. How you doing? What's going on? I got a little turd here. He says he's your son. What's his name? He tells me. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and my first response was, he's not a turd. Whoa. Now the daddy kicked in, and I'm mad at the cop. But now I got to remember where he's at every night. Every night, night after night after night, every night. So I got the feeling, damn, you know, I'm in the same place they're in all of a sudden. So I go yoke the young man up, and I bring him back home, and we get the stern lecture. I want to know what's going on, and down and down and down and down. And you know what? I'm scared to death. I'm a policeman. I have faced death. Did it just the other night. Almost was killed. That scared me. Maybe it doesn't equate to some of the personal experiences you've had, but I'm one of the people. Those cops out there are one of the people. They seem to be separating themselves farther and farther from you. I don't like that. I don't care for that one bit. But that's what's happening. It has happened in my family, and I got a taste of it and didn't like it. I got no special care. I had to pay for a lawyer. Came out of my pocket, big bucks. It isn't cheap. When you ask for a public defender, when you ask for one for free, they used to have a little sign when they made planes back in World War II. Some of you may know this. Out of every aircraft that came out, there was a little sign on the side of it that said, this plane was built by the lowest bidder. Public defenders, yeah, they want to do right by you, but I tell you what, if you're paying $35,000 like a cartel lawyer is as opposed to paying nothing, what do you think you're going to get? That is your system, not mine. It's yours. If I go to jail, I'm afraid I have to sit there. No way. Something else we'll get to. We start to see what I call a turn of the century policing. We start to see a trend now where The civil liberties become a real strong issue. ACLU, we find organizations like ACLU relying against police organizations, and they're the bad guys, we're the good guys because they're liberal lawyers and we're right. You know, what can I tell you? They're them and we're right. So we now come a little bit more in line with rules and regulations and standards of training. Other issues are starting to get looked at when these court cases come up. Policeman makes a mistake. How was he trained? How was he taught? Well, they look in his training records. Well, lo and behold, he didn't get many hours of that particular topic, so guess what happens? The system is now getting sued because they did not provide the proper training for this officer, this guy that made this mistake. The Supreme Court has balanced that with what they call a good faith doctrine, which means if I stop your car on traffic, I have a reason to stop you, and I stop your car on traffic, and I approach you and I start to talk with you, and I think I smell the odor of marijuana, burning marijuana coming from your vehicle, that's probable cause. That gives me more than just a reasonable suspicion to say, little Johnny, I'd like to talk to you. Would you come out of your car, please? Okay? I can do that. I asked little Johnny, do you have any drugs on you? And little Johnny says, yes. Did I have a right to ask little Johnny that? After all, I'm asking him if he does have drugs to commit himself here. Do I have a right to ask him that? Well, yes, I do, legally. You have any drugs on you? If he says, yes, I do, guess what I get to do with little Johnny? If little Johnny says, no, I don't, guess what I get to do next? I get to search the front part of little Johnny. I get to search the front part of his car. You know why? The Supreme Court says it's okay for me to protect myself. I can look for weapons. Weapons only. Weapons only. I still don't believe little Johnny. His eyes are messed up. I can smell it in his hair. I still don't believe him. And he's getting real nervous the longer I have him there. And I say, little Johnny, you mind if I look through your car? And little Johnny says, no. Can't do that. I know little Johnny's wrong. I know he's wrong. There's something about little Johnny. And I decide on my own, if I let this car go, I think dope is leaving this scene. I think it's going to leave here. So what do? I search the car anyway. And what do I find in his trunk? This is a real case. What do I find in his trunk? 20 pounds of weed. Is that a good one? No. That's not a good one. First of all, he denied me the right to look in his car. That's called a consent search. I can't do that just on my own. But I knew. Something inside me knew. Why did I know? The Supreme Court actually gives me credit for my instinct. I've been a cop for 29 years, and they recognize the fact that this guy has seen a few things before. He's seen a few things before. Now, I'm going to lose that case. It's no good. I can't file it. No good. Illegal search. What I did is termed an illegal search. Okay? Can anything happen to me? I can be sued. But are they going to win? No. Why? Because I acted in good faith. I used that instinct. Something told me, and was I right? Did I find the 20 pounds? Yeah. Was the case any good? No. But the balance of the civil liberties and what a police officer has a right to do in the furtherance of his duty is that good faith. If I can't demonstrate good faith, none of it's any good, and I can be sued. Vicarious liability is a big issue today.
Frank,
Yes.
if you had found a moving violation that you could have arrested him on,
Yes.
could you then have legally searched the car?
That is called a method. If I can book you on traffic. While I'm booking, and this is another thing the Supreme Court's done. We always talk about being handcuffed, and I teach this to cadets. We always talk about being handcuffed. Okay, but the Supreme Court passed another rule. Those liberals, bam, can't do my job.
This Supreme Court you're calling liberal?
Yes, yeah. It was the easiest way out. I go through I arrest you. I think something's wrong with little Johnny, and I decide I'm going to book you on the traffic ticket. I stopped you for running a red light. Okay? That's why I initially stopped you. I'm going to book you on that ticket. I can put you in jail for the ticket. Now, guess what? I am responsible for your motor vehicle. I'm responsible for your well-being, your safety, and the safety of your property. In order to ensure that those things are safeguarded, guess what the Supreme Court told me to do? Well, I impound your car, but you know what I got to do with it? Inventory it. Now, do we have some subtle differences between search and inventory? Do we not think that they may be one? This is something I teach to policemen. Guys, there's more than one way to investigate a situation. You may not like to hear that, folks, but this is the truth. That's the law. If I take your car, I have to inventory its contents, because when you get the car back and you've been ripped off by some unscrupulous record driver out there, who are you going to sue? Moi. Now, you're not coming after me because I have in front of me this sheet of paper, this inventory that's got everything in it. Does that sound right to you, that I should protect your property? I mean, I arrested you. I towed your car. Should I not be responsible for it when you get out of jail? Let me hear some opinions. Well then, I must inventory your stuff. I get to go through your stuff. And the Supreme Court says that's okay. That is a far departure from what it used to be. Back in the 60s, any traffic stop, especially if you had long hair, was an automatic search. It was accepted. It was the practice. I feared the cops. When I had long hair, I feared the cops more than I did the bad guys finding out I was a cop. Okay? Yes, sir.
The Supreme Court says in your case where you stopped a guy on the street and you asked if you could look in his car and he said no. If he'd have said yes, the Supreme Court gave you the right to search for weapons only, right?
No.
Isn't that what
If he gave me consent to search, I can search for anything. The Supreme Court gave me a right without consent to search in his immediate area for weapons. If I remove you from this seat and I'm going to place you back in that seat and there's a weapon at your disposal, they recognize that my job can be a dangerous one, so I have a right to sit right here and check to make sure that there's nothing that will harm me.
Okay. What I was asking, though, you have, in that situation, you have the right to search for weapons only. Now, you search for weapons, you accidentally run across marijuana.
There he is.
And he has no weapon, okay, so can you arrest him on a marijuana holding charge?
Yes. Yes. The test, and we're getting far afield from some things, but this is good. The test for the Supreme Court is, did I have a right to be there when I found it? Okay? If I had a right to be at that particular place, anything that I find that is a result of a legal search is admissible as evidence. We have any law students? Any lawyers? Anybody in here? I don't see anybody jumping all over it. That's the law of the land. If I find it as a result of a legal search, it's admissible no matter what it is. The inventory is a legal search. If I open up your trunk, I arrested you for traffic, but if I opened up your trunk and found that 20 pounds of weed, that's what you get nailed with. And that's legal. And they said that's okay. Oh, it happens all the time.
Recently in the news, there was a case where someone was driving, weaving in and out of lanes, and they stopped the car and they found like major cocaine, and that was primarily the reason that they were stopped.
Yeah. I have a little more insight into that particular case, and if that guy lives through this month, I'll be surprised. There are some people very unhappy about his traffic problem. I will get into a lot of that in the next hour. Yes?
My question is, if you were only allowed to look for weapons, if you don't find a weapon, then you shouldn't be able to touch anything else. But
well,
do you see
now,
what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure. I'm looking for the weapon. I don't find it, but there's a pile of dope there. It's not a gun. I got to leave it. And I have to leave this guy drive down the road with knowing possessing drugs. It gets to be a point of the law both ways in that let's say, here's another one. You invite me to your house. You've been burglarized. And you're a complainant. You're mad. You're hot. You come back from vacation. Your TV, your stereo's gone. You invite me into your house. Come in. Look around. It's terrible. Can you find your serial numbers? Yes, maybe. I don't know. And I'm going around. I'm looking, and you're inviting me. Please come to the house. I want you to see they broke this and they broke that. And lo and behold, on your dresser, this happens all the time too, On your dresser is that little mirror with about 3 rails of coke on it, quote unquote. Did I have a right to be in your house? Yes. What was my function? To make a report for the burglary, for your insurance purposes, okay? So I had a right to do that, but I shouldn't have a right to take that coke and put you in jail. It doesn't seem like it's fair, but...
I have another curiosity question. What happened with those 20 pounds of marijuana, the illegal search?
Yeah.
Could you take it up, or?
Yeah, oh yes. Never leave it. Can't leave it. You take it, you tag it, you send it to the chemist and mark it to be destroyed.
Even though it was an illegal search?
Yes. Now, this is a matter of definition by law being illegal. We're not saying that I performed a criminal act. The law terms that any person, and I'm a citizen when it comes to defining that, any person that makes that search, if they did not have probable cause and a right to be there, okay, bad search. It is termed illegal. That is a legal term. Not something I'm going to be hung for and the feds are going to come get me. It happens all the time. A DA is going to look at it and say, Frank, I don't think you have enough. I don't think you have enough here. That's all I've got. We're not taking it. Okay, thanks. We cut the guy loose, we destroy the dope, and nothing happens to me. It is termed an illegal search only by definition.
And do you still have his car?
Yeah.
Oh, he gets his car back. No, he gets the car back.
How much does he have to pay to get his car back?
See me after class. I have connections. If that's, I tell you the truth, I don't know what it is now. Depends on whether we keep it or whether they have a wrecker tow it and it goes to this wrecker. You know, that's kind of unfair too. But
You haven't confiscated the car under forfeiture laws?
no. It's that was illegal. It was thrown out. Therefore, I had no stay or no standing with the vehicle. Under normal circumstances, had they taken it, I'm afraid I need at least 500 pounds or more anymore of marijuana in that car to seize it. That's just marijuana. You want to think about liberties? It used to be 4 ounces as a felony. Now I have to have 500 pounds to take your car. Marijuana seems to be a very special issue with the people.
And when you think
But
about...
fear not, it may happen yet, okay?
When you think about the bulk amount that 500 pounds actually amounts to, that's an awful lot of marijuana in terms of bulk, as opposed to any kind of powder.
And considering it this way, how much money that represents, that's $500 to $800 a pound for marijuana right now. That's a large amount of money. And you're not just talking, I mean, nobody hangs on to 500 pounds as his personal stash. It was mine, it was only mine, she didn't have anything to do with it, I smoke it, it wasn't hers. Sir, there's 500 pounds there. I don't care, I smoke a lot. I've heard it. Good try. Again, it's not just a matter of what the substance does or doesn't do. Please try to keep in mind the other consequences involved. The people that do these things, these smugglers, they're very unscrupulous people. It's not little Johnny on the street corner anymore selling a joint. And if you care to check it, even back when you were in school, if they were such a good friend, why'd they sell it to you? Why couldn't they just give it to you? Nobody's a friend in the drug business. They always take your money.
Will you talk in the second half of class about how that has changed?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I will. We're getting to wind down now. But what we're starting to see now in this new era of law enforcement is we're bringing to the public now how lucrative this business is, now that we're talking about it. And these trials are now exposing to people, not only jury panels, but the citizens themselves, how much money is actually represented in these deals. This is a money business. This isn't about friends helping friends. This is strictly a money-making initiative. The selling of drugs has always been just a money-making initiative, no matter what type of drug it is. This guy sold it to another guy to get the money back for what he sold it for, and if he makes a little profit, that's okay. And that's the way it is now. That's the way it was then. It's not going to change. But the amounts that we're seeing, the weights that we're seeing, and the money we're seeing out there involved in the business is tenfold what it was. Probably that much dope was going through then. We couldn't touch it. When all I could buy is $10 at a time, we couldn't touch it. And now maybe I can spend $20 now. It's not much better, but to somewhat it is. We're starting to find a way to compound the risk for the bad guy. Tell you what, this may be a good stopping point. Let's stop for a break right now. We'll come back after the break and we'll pick up where we left off.